In the early days of home video, fear moved faster than truth. Newspapers screamed, politicians panicked, police raided living rooms like crime scenes. A new enemy had arrived on plastic tape. These films were not reviewed, they were seized. This is the true story of 13 video nasties so extreme that censors declared war on horror itself. Number 13. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Cannibal Holocaust does not begin like a movie. It feels like evidence. Released during a moment when audiences were unprepared for brutality, presented as realism, the film followed a lost documentary crew into the Amazon jungle. What followed shattered every boundary that censorship boards believed still existed. Italian director Ruggero Deodato staged violence with an almost clinical coldness. Indigenous characters were shown suffering humiliation, assault, and slaughter. Animals were killed on camera. Not simulated, real. Audiences did not know what they were seeing, and that confusion became the film's greatest weapon. Rumors exploded that the actors had actually died during filming. Courts demanded proof that the performers were alive. In the United Kingdom, Cannibal Holocaust was not merely banned, it was seized. Police confiscated tapes directly from video shops. Store owners were prosecuted. Possession alone could invite investigation. The film was labeled morally corrupting and dangerous to society. Not because it frightened viewers, but because it challenged the idea that cinema should protect its audience. The found footage structure convinced many that what they were seeing was real violence captured without restraint. That illusion horrified lawmakers. Deodato himself was arrested in Italy on obscenity charges. The film was treated as a crime scene rather than art. Number 12. The Driller Killer, 1979. The Driller Killer did not need monsters. It did not need demons. It only needed a city collapsing under its own noise. Set in the decaying streets of New York, the film followed a struggling artist driven mad by poverty pressure and urban chaos. Abel Ferrara directed with raw desperation. Grainy visuals screamed instability. The violence was sudden, messy, and intimate. A power drill became a symbol of psychological fracture rather than spectacle. There was no fantasy buffer, no moral distance, just rage unfolding in real time. When the tape reached Britain, it collided directly with a moral panic already boiling. Tabloids seized the imagery. One still image became infamous. A man screaming beneath a drill. It appeared on newspaper covers as proof that home video was poisoning society. Police raids followed. Video shops were searched. The Driller Killer was seized under obscenity laws. It became one of the first films prosecuted as a video nasty. Courts debated whether the film encouraged violence or simply depicted it. Ferrara argued that the movie was about mental illness and alienation. Censors saw only blood. Context was irrelevant. The drill was enough. Number 11. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few films inspired as much outrage as I Spit on Your Grave. Marketed originally as a rape revenge thriller, it depicted prolonged violence followed by brutal retaliation. The structure alone horrified censorship boards, but the tone sealed its fate. The first half of the film was nearly unbearable for many viewers. Assaults were depicted with minimal cutaways. The camera refused to look away. There was no soundtrack to soften the impact. Silence made it worse. The director Mirzarchi argued that the film condemned violence by forcing viewers to endure it. He claimed the revenge portion empowered the victim. Censors rejected that argument completely. They believed the film eroticized brutality. They believed it existed only to shock. Under the Video Recordings Act, possession became dangerous. Distributors faced prosecution. The film vanished underground. Number 10. Zombie Flesh Eaters, 1979. The notorious eyeball scene became the subject of national outrage. A woman being slowly pulled into a jagged splinter that punctured her eye in real time with no cutaway. Number 9. Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's debut film did not ask for forgiveness. It demanded you endure. Last House on the Left was a movie born in rage and constructed like a trap, inspired by Ingmar Bergman. The Virgin Spring, it took a story of innocence violated and modernized it into a savage spiral of vengeance. It was raw, it was unstable, and it was unlike anything British audiences had ever seen. The story follows two teenage girls abducted, tortured, and murdered by a group of criminals. But the horror does not end there. The killers unknowingly take refuge in the home of one of the girl parents. What follows is revenge that feels less like justice and more like primal response. Violence is answered with violence. Civility dissolves. There are no heroes, only survivors. The film tone is schizophrenic. 1 minute brutal assault. The next, slapstick cop scenes. Viewers did not know how to process it. Critics were divided. Some called it art, others called it filth. In the United Kingdom, authorities made their position clear. They seized it, prosecuted it, and made it a prime example of what video nasties represented. They did not care that it had a message. They only saw exploitation. The film was banned for decades. Even in its censored versions, it caused discomfort. But among horror historians, it is now seen as pivotal, the beginning of something new. Number 8. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi. The Evil Dead was never supposed to be part of the video nasty scandal. It was a supernatural splatter movie with demonic possession and low-budget charm. But timing was everything. Released just as the panic reached fever pitch, the film was swept into the chaos, not because it was the most extreme, but because it was caught in the crossfire. The Evil Dead followed 5 friends who venture into a remote cabin only to awaken ancient forces. One by one, they are possessed. One by one, they are destroyed. The camera became a character swooping through forests, crashing through windows. Raimi invented a kinetic horror language. But British authorities did not speak that language. They saw mutilation, dismemberment, and a tree assault scene that crossed every line. The seizure of the film shocked Raimi, who had hoped to scare people, not spark moral panic, but tabloids plastered stills of possessed women and chainsaw-wielding survivors. They called it a threat to children. Schools issued warnings. Parents called hotlines. Police raided shops. The Evil Dead was labeled obscene and prosecuted under the same laws used for hardcore pornography and snuff films. For horror fans, this became a defining moment. A film that was playful, imaginative, and entirely fictional was treated like criminal evidence. Number 7. Faces of Death, 1978. Faces of Death did not pretend to be a movie. It claimed to be something darker. A forbidden documentary, a snuff collage, an unfiltered look into the moments when life ends and death begins. Some of it was fake. Some of it was real. That uncertainty became the horror. The film opens with a calm narrator guiding viewers through morgues, crime scenes, and execution footage. You are not told what is staged. You are not told what is authentic. You are just shown electrocutions, animal slaughter, autopsies, public disasters. The line between journalism and provocation is not just blurred, it is erased completely. British censors did not know what they were dealing with. Faces of Death was unlike any other video nasty. It was not a story. It was not fiction. It was a dare. The BBFC refused classification. Police raided shops and seized copies. Watching it became an underground challenge. The kind of tape you only saw once and never forgot. The power of the film came from its quiet tone. The narrator sounded clinical, even friendly. The music was soft, even beautiful. But the images were not. They were confrontational, cold, and permanent. Even the fakest scenes felt real because they were treated seriously. You were not allowed to laugh. You were told to witness. Number 6. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. Cannibal Ferox was not trying to be clever. It was not trying to hide behind metaphor. It opened with bold text calling itself the most violent film ever made. And it delivered. Every taboo was broken. Every line crossed. The result was a movie that horrified even hardened horror fans. Directed by Umberto Lenzi. Cannibal Ferox followed 3 travelers into the Amazon jungle, where they encounter a tribe pushed to violence by Western cruelty. What begins as an anthropological adventure turns into a blood-soaked nightmare. Torture, mutilation, flesh-eating, all presented with brutal indifference. But the real controversy was not the human gore. It was the animal violence. Real animals were killed on camera. A turtle was butchered in graphic detail. A pig was shot in the head. These scenes were not simulated. They were acts of slaughter filmed for shock. British authorities did not hesitate. The film was banned outright. Police seized tapes. Distributors were fined. Cannibal Ferox was labeled not just obscene but evil. It became a key symbol of everything wrong with unregulated home video. Parents were warned, stores were threatened, and anyone who owned a copy was seen as dangerous. Number 5. SS Experiment Camp, 1976. SS Experiment Camp did not arrive quietly. It arrived like a provocation wrapped in barbed wire. The artwork alone caused national uproar. A nude woman crucified beneath a Nazi flag, her body used as shock marketing. For many, it was the most offensive VHS cover ever printed, but the content inside was even worse. Set in a fictional World War II concentration camp, the film depicted sadistic experiments, degradation, and torture under the hands of Nazi officers. There was no historical context, no attempt at nuance, just lurid imagery filmed with a cold mechanical eye. The inmates were victims. The guards were caricatures of evil, but none of it felt like commentary. It felt like exploitation without a mask. British censors reacted with immediate fury. The film was seized without hesitation. It became one of the most aggressively targeted titles during the video nasty panic. Lawmakers called it a disgrace. Veterans associations demanded its destruction. Distributors were prosecuted. Owning a copy became a legal risk. What made SS Experiment Camp uniquely reviled was not just its use of real historical trauma. It was the way it seemed to profit from it. It turned one of humanity's darkest chapters into a stage for sleaze. Number 4. Island of Death, 1976. Island of Death did not sneak past the censors. It sprinted into their crosshairs, screaming. Directed by Greek filmmaker Nikos Masterakis, this film looked like a sun-drenched vacation movie. But beneath the blue skies and whitewashed walls was a nightmare so depraved that even hardened horror fans recoiled. The story follows a young couple visiting a Greek island on what appears to be a romantic getaway. But they are not tourists. They are murderers. Sadistic psycho killers targeting anyone they consider sinful. Their victims include nuns, drug users, and even a local shepherd. The couple kills with calculated brutality. Acid, crucifixion, decapitation, humiliation, and in one notorious scene, bestiality. Yes, the film goes there, and then keeps going. When Island of Death hit British video shelves in the early 80s, it bypassed theatrical review. It was sold directly to consumers. But once the video nasty panic exploded, the film became a prime target. Police raided stores. Tapes were confiscated. Distributors were prosecuted. It was banned not for a single scene, but for its total moral collapse. There was no message, no redemption, just unrelenting cruelty presented as entertainment. Censors were outraged by the lack of restraint. Unlike traditional horror, Island of Death had no supernatural framing, no allegory, no monster to blame. The killers were young, attractive, human. They murdered without remorse and smiled while doing it. Number 3. Blood Feast, 1963. Blood Feast may be tame by modern standards, but in 1963 it detonated like a landmine. Directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, this low-budget shocker is widely considered the first true splatter film. Its plot was almost irrelevant. What mattered was the gore, the bright red blood, the torn limbs, the close-up carnage that had never been shown on screen before. The story is simple. A deranged caterer sacrifices women to an ancient Egyptian goddess. Victims are kidnapped, mutilated, and dismembered. Tongues are ripped out. Brains are removed. Blood sprays everywhere. It was absurd. It was cartoonish. But it was also something new. horror that celebrated the grotesque. When Blood Feast found its way onto British VHS decades later, it landed in the middle of the video nasty hysteria. Despite its age and dated effects, it was still deemed offensive. Authorities seized copies. The film was prosecuted under obscenity laws. Critics argued that its sole purpose was to glorify violence. Censors ignored its historical significance and focused only on the gore. But Blood Feast was more than shock value. It was the blueprint for an entire subgenre. Without it, there is no Evil Dead, no Friday the 13th, no Saw. Number 2. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain. 1981. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain did not just get banned, it got someone arrested. The film follows a man recently released from a mental hospital who spirals into psychotic violence and hallucinations. The murders are graphic, the editing is disorienting, and the gore is extreme even by video nasty standards. But what truly set this film apart was a single screening. In 1983, a cinema in London defied the authorities and showed an uncut print. The projectionist was charged with obscenity, not the director, not the distributor, the projectionist. It became the most infamous legal case of the entire video nasty era. The film was banned immediately, tapes were seized, and for decades it remained one of the most legally toxic titles in British censorship history. The violence was not stylish, it was ugly, chaotic, bleeding from the screen like trauma, not entertainment. Censors called it corrupting, audiences called it unforgettable. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain proved that sometimes fear is not just on screen. Sometimes it walks into the courtroom. Number 1. Love Camp 7, 1969. Love Camp 7 was never misunderstood. It was never misinterpreted. From its opening frames, it declared exactly what it intended to be. A Nazi exploitation film built entirely around humiliation, violence, and historical desecration. And that honesty is precisely why censors reacted with absolute zero tolerance. The film follows two Allied female agents who deliberately infiltrate a Nazi concentration camp disguised as prisoners. But any pretense of espionage collapses almost immediately. What follows is a parade of abuse staged as spectacle. Prisoners are tortured, mocked, stripped, and assaulted. Nazi officers are presented not as villains to be defeated, but as sadistic overseers indulging in cruelty. The suffering is prolonged, and the setting is used as a backdrop rather than a warning. When Love Camp 7 entered the British home video market, it detonated instantly. Authorities did not debate classification, they did not request cuts, they seized it outright. The film was judged obscene on principle, not just offensive, not just excessive, but morally indefensible. Holocaust imagery was being exploited for titillation. That alone guaranteed its erasure. Police confiscated copies without hesitation. Distributors dropped it overnight. Shops destroyed tapes rather than risk prosecution. For years, the film was spoken about only in hushed tones, not as a horror classic, but as a warning. Love Camp 7 represents the endpoint of the video nasty panic. The moment when censorship was no longer about protecting children or regulating gore. It was about drawing a final line. This film crossed it, and history never allowed it back. The video nasty era was never just about horror films. It was about fear of losing control, fear of images that refused permission. These 13 films became symbols of panic, power, and suppression. Today, they remain reminders that censorship often reveals more about society than the art it tries to erase.